Ever since humans first set sail, they've been at the mercy of the weather. From calm seas to raging storms, the ocean could turn on them in a heartbeat. Pirates, tough, daring, and fearless in many ways, were no exception. They knew just how brutal a storm could be. If they saw dark clouds rolling in, they'd try to steer clear. But here's the problem. Weather forecasts weren't a thing until 1859. So back then, sailors had no radar, no satellite data, just their eyes, word of mouth from other crews, and a whole lot of superstition. Sailors leaned hard on folklore and old sayings passed down through generations. One of the most well-known went, "Red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky in the morning, sailors take warning." And believe it or not, there's actually some science behind it. In mid-latitude regions, where storms usually approach from the west, a red sky at night could mean the setting sun is shining through dry, clear air. Good news. But red skies in the morning might mean a storm is heading in with the sunrise. So yeah, they weren't just being poetic, they were observing real atmospheric clues. But sailors didn't stop with skies. They paid close attention to animals too, especially cats. Nearly every ship had a cat on board. They were there to chase down rats, sure, but also seen as weather predictors. And oddly enough, black cats, which were usually seen as bad luck on land, were actually considered lucky at sea. Sailors believed that if a cat licked its fur the wrong way, a hailstorm was coming. If it sneezed, rain was on the way. And if it started darting around all frisky, then wind was about to pick up. But if a cat ever went missing, or worse, was thrown overboard, it was said the cat would bring down a storm to sink the entire ship. So yeah, messing with a ship's cat was definitely off limits. There were certain days pirates wouldn't even leave port. Fridays, for instance, were seen as unlucky sailing days. And then there was Candlemas, a Christian holiday in early February. Sailors believed that setting out on that day meant the voyage was doomed. Now, technically, there were barometers during the golden age of piracy, tools that could measure air pressure and help predict storms, but they were rare. They were expensive, not well understood, and you wouldn't find one on most pirate ships. So instead, pirates relied on their senses. They'd feel the air. Was it more humid than usual? Was the wind shifting? They paid close attention to all those little signs. If they sensed trouble coming, they'd act fast. The crew would start securing everything on deck, especially the heavy stuff, and move anything they could down into the ship's hold. That lower placement helped stabilize the ship, working as ballast. And that was crucial. When waves start pounding and winds slamming into the sails, an unstable ship can quickly become a death trap. One major risk was broaching. That's when the ship turns sideways to the waves, making the rudder useless. If that happened, the ship could easily capsize. Even if it didn't flip entirely, tilting too far could allow enough water on board to send the ship to the bottom. Heavy gear posed another major threat, especially the cannons. A single 12-pounder cannon could weigh over 3,000 pounds. If that broke free during a storm, it could crush a sailor or smash right through a mast or wall. Even the cannonballs were dangerous. Each one weighed about 12 pounds, and in rough seas, they could turn into deadly projectiles. That's why the crew had to stow absolutely everything: tables, chairs, swords, pistols, whatever wasn't bolted down. Flames were another hazard. Lanterns and candles had to be put out to avoid the risk of fire, especially if they got knocked over. Below deck, the crew worked to secure supplies, while up top, the rest of the crew started getting themselves ready for the worst. They'd tie ropes around their waists, basically a safety harness, in case anyone got swept overboard. Then they'd furl the sails, leaving just enough canvas to keep control of the ship without risking a total blowout. They'd also reinforce the masts as best they could. Now, here's an interesting detail. The cargo hold usually had wooden grates instead of solid flooring to let air circulate below. But during a storm, all that open space was a disaster waiting to happen. Rain and crashing waves could flood the lower decks in no time. So the crew would cover the grates with tightly stretched canvas and secure it with wooden slats called battens. That's actually where we get the phrase, "batten down the hatches." It was quite literally a step in storm prep. The captain, meanwhile, had one of the hardest jobs. He had to steer the ship into the wind, angled just right so the vessel could move forward and hit the waves head-on. Turning the ship away and letting the wind hit from behind might seem easier, but it was incredibly dangerous. The stern, or back of the ship, was vulnerable to waves crashing over it. If that happened, water could flood in fast or even snap the ship in two under the pressure. The goal was to keep the right amount of speed, fast enough to ride up the waves, but slow enough to avoid snapping the masts. But the ocean wasn't the only thing they had to worry about. The ship's position relative to land could turn a rough storm into a full-blown nightmare. If a storm pushed a ship toward the coastline, there was almost no chance of escape. Running aground meant the waves would tear the ship apart, and there was no saving anyone or anything once that happened. One of the most infamous examples of this happened in 1715 with the Spanish treasure fleet. This was a group of 12 ships hauling cargo from the New World, including gold bullion and roughly 14 million silver pesos. They left Havana, Cuba on July 24th, heading for Spain. But just a week into the journey, disaster struck. The fleet sailed straight into a hurricane. The storm pushed them toward Florida's coast, near what we now call Vero Beach. By 2 in the morning, 11 of the 12 ships were either sunk or wrecked on shore. The news of the disaster spread like wildfire. Pirates from all over heard about the wreck and rushed to the area, hoping to recover as much treasure as they could before the Spanish got back to it. One of the pirates who heard about the wreck was a young former Royal Navy sailor from Cape Cod named Samuel Bellamy. The moment the story reached him, he saw an opportunity, not just for treasure, but for something bigger. Bellamy wasn't your average rogue. He was smart, charismatic, and had ambitions far beyond simple plunder. So he gathered a crew and set out for Florida, determined to claim a share of the Spanish treasure before it disappeared beneath the waves or into someone else's hands. But fate has a dark sense of humor. A year later, Bellamy, now a full-fledged pirate captain, would meet the exact same fate as the treasure fleet he once sought to rob. By April 1718, Bellamy was sailing north along the Atlantic coast, heading back to Cape Cod. His ship? The Whydah Galley, a massive, heavily armed former slave ship that had been captured and converted into a pirate vessel. The Whydah wasn't just powerful, she was loaded with loot. Bellamy and his 145-man crew were returning from a wildly successful voyage, carrying more than 4 tons of silver and gold. Everything was going smoothly, until it wasn't. Around sunset, on April 26th, the Whydah suddenly found herself becalmed. The wind died down completely, leaving the ship stranded in still waters. Not long after, a thick fog rolled in, cutting off visibility and separating the Whydah from the 3 other pirate ships she was sailing with. Then came the real danger. The weather took a sharp turn. A nor'easter started to build, cold, powerful winds blowing from the northeast. For sailors in those waters, a nor'easter was among the worst possible scenarios. The wind began to howl, and the Whydah was slowly but steadily pushed toward the Massachusetts coastline. By midnight, things went from bad to catastrophic. As the Whydah crested one wave, her bow slammed into a hidden sandbar. The force of the impact shattered the ship's keel, the very backbone of the vessel. She didn't stand a chance after that. The ship began to capsize, rolling onto her side. 60 heavy cannons, most of which had been stored low in the ship for ballast, tore through the decks as the vessel flipped. The weight of the weaponry and the shifting treasure ripped the ship apart from the inside. Gold and silver scattered across the sea floor, but many of the crew didn't live long enough to care. They were either crushed, trapped, or drowned as the ship broke apart. Only 2 men survived the wreck. One of them, Thomas Davis, would later describe the scene with chilling clarity. In a quarter of an hour after the ship struck, the mainmast was carried by the board, and in the morning she was beat to pieces. It all happened in less than 15 minutes. The Whydah was gone, along with nearly everyone on board, including Bellamy himself. Stories like this make it clear that for all their swagger and firepower, pirates were still at the mercy of the sea. While most of us imagine them battling Navy ships or storming coastal towns, far more pirates likely died from storms than from any sword or cannonball. It's easy to forget just how small those ships really were. When you picture a pirate ship, you might think of a massive, sturdy vessel, but many were relatively modest in size. Add in rough seas, poor navigation tools, and heavy loads of treasure and weapons, and it's a miracle any of them made it through a storm at all. Even today, with all our advanced tech, storms at sea are no joke. On average, about 10 cargo ships still sink every single year. And those are massive, modern vessels with steel hulls, engines, and satellite communication. Now imagine sailing through the same kind of storm on a wooden ship with canvas sails and no engine. The courage, or maybe desperation, it took to live that life is something that's hard to wrap your head around. Sailors back then didn't have GPS or radio. If a ship went missing in a storm, there was no search and rescue team coming to find them. They were on their own, relying on instinct, experience, and a whole lot of luck. When things went wrong, they went wrong fast. One moment the sky might be clear. The next the wind would shift, the air would thicken, and the waves would start to build. Storms were the great equalizer. It didn't matter if you were a Spanish treasure fleet, a notorious pirate, or a humble merchant vessel. When nature decided to strike, there was very little you could do. And yet, pirates kept sailing. They didn't have the luxury of waiting for calm seas. Treasure didn't wait. Trade ships didn't wait. And sometimes the best opportunities came right after a storm, when another vessel had wrecked or ports were caught off guard. That meant pushing their ships and themselves to the limit. It also meant improvising. Crews had to make fast decisions. If a storm was coming and they were near land, they might try to anchor and ride it out, assuming the seabed was right and the anchor would hold. But if they were caught in open water, they had to brace for the worst. The crew would be soaked to the bone, clinging to ropes, working the sails in freezing winds, all while trying not to get swept away. And there was no break, no safe place to hide. Just the rolling of the waves, the screaming of the wind, and the creaking of the wooden hull beneath their feet. For many pirates, it wasn't the sword or the noose that ended their journey. It was the sea itself.
Stories like the wreck of the Whydah galley weren't rare. In fact, many shipwrecks from the golden age of piracy still sit beneath the ocean today, hidden under layers of sand and coral, waiting to tell their stories. Some are treasure ships lost in hurricanes, others are pirate vessels torn apart by waves, and a few are warships that simply vanished during a storm. No cannon fire, no final battle, just silence and water. And here's what's really haunting. In many cases, we still don't know exactly where or how these ships went down. The ocean doesn't leave behind neat clues. Currents shift, sand buries evidence, and over time, even the strongest wooden hulls rot away. But the danger pirates faced from storms wasn't just in the moment. It lingered in their reputation, in the decisions they made, and in how they lived. Most pirates didn't fear battle. They feared what the sea could do when it turned cruel. Because a storm wasn't just a temporary threat, it was a rolling judgment from nature. It could strip a crew of everything they had in minutes. Their loot, their weapons, their ship, their lives. Gone. No one to blame, no one to fight back. Just wind and water, relentless and uncaring. That's why pirates took storms so seriously. It wasn't just about battening down hatches and tying lines. It was about survival. Every move they made when a storm approached was based on generations of hard-won experience. What to do, what to avoid, how to read the sky, the sea, even the animals around them. They learned that luck mattered, but preparation mattered more. And even with all the preparation in the world, sometimes that wasn't enough. Modern sailors still face similar challenges, though now with radar, sonar, GPS, and reinforced hulls. And yet, despite all of that, the sea still claims lives. Around 10 cargo ships vanish every year, often in storms, proving that even the most advanced technology can't guarantee safety. And those ships are massive, hundreds of feet long, made of steel, with entire engineering teams on board. Now imagine you're a pirate in the early 1700s. Your ship is made of wood, your sails are canvas, you navigate by stars and crude maps. You have no forecast, no warning system, and no rescue plan. Your crew sleeps below deck next to barrels of powder, and your deck is lined with cannons that could crush you if they break loose. You're sailing into waters you've never seen before, with a storm creeping up behind you. That was the daily gamble of a pirate. Yet they did it anyway, day after day, voyage after voyage. They weren't just chasing gold, they were challenging the sea itself. And the sea didn't care. That's what made the life of a pirate so fascinating and so short. Many of the most legendary pirates we hear about today, Blackbeard, Calico Jack, Anne Bonny, and Charles Vane, lived fast and died young. While some were captured and executed, plenty were simply swallowed by the sea, their fates unknown. And for every famous name, there were hundreds more lost to history, their ships shattered in storms, their stories ending beneath the waves. Storms weren't just background noise in pirate life, they were defining events. They reshaped plans, ended careers, and decided who lived and who didn't. And when you look back at the great shipwrecks of pirate history, you start to see a pattern. More often than not, it wasn't a navy that took down a pirate fleet. It was weather. That's what makes the sea such a compelling part of the pirate mythos. It wasn't just the setting, it was the ultimate enemy, the final test. And while pirates might have been fearless in battle, their respect for storms reveals something deeper. They knew there was a force out there bigger than themselves. No matter how much treasure they stole, no matter how many ships they sank, when the skies turned dark and the winds began to howl, every pirate became equal in the eyes of the storm. And honestly, that's still true today. Whether you're a merchant captain or a weekend sailor, the sea doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care how many years you've spent on the water. When a storm rolls in, all that matters is how well you prepared and how much fight you've got left. So the next time you hear the phrase "batten down the hatches" or see a red sky in the morning, think about the pirates. Think about men like Bellamy and the crew of the Whydah Galley. Think about how they faced nature at its worst without the tools we take for granted today. And think about what it means to sail into the unknown, knowing full well that the sea might not let you come back. Because at the end of the day, the greatest threat pirates ever faced wasn't a cannon or a king's navy. It was the storm. And in that, we see not just the story of pirates, but the story of every sailor who's ever dared to challenge the ocean.